Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to use this video in a broad spectrum of different classes because the goal here is just to understand two quick things. First, what is large N data? This is data set particularly for U.S. foreign policy, national security, just things that have to do with international relations. So this is very, very important. So first, this is what we call a large N data set. Look at how many data points you have, 1,848. So this obviously is very different from a case study where you might do one or two, let's say, why diplomacy worked in one area and not another. Why was there a revolution in one country and not another? This is a large N data set. Now, we're going to ignore that. I don't know why they have one, two, but it's a pretty interesting data set on where you have a conflict type, region, and death estimate. The goal here is to understand this is conflict type. There's three types, and this is the death estimate. So you can ask an interesting research question. Let's say you're a foreign policy advisor, not just for the United States, but any country. And you say, what kind of conflict creates more death? So I wrote here, there are three types. Interstate is a conventional conflict between states like the Ukraine and Russia. An internal conflict, government against rebel groups, like in Colombia, right? Two rebel groups fighting, a rebel group fighting against the government, but because of the peace process that ended, but there's still issues there. Internationalized government against a rebel group that has an outside force helping it, like Sierra Leone, where Sierra Leone was having problems with rebel groups, but it was being supported by Liberia, Nicaragua, the Contra War, etc. Now, I don't know who coded for this, but we're just going to use it as it is. There's always a problem with coding. But so you have different conflict types. We have those three. So you can see internal, a lot of internationalized, etc. So you're gonna see that's a lot of internal and internationalized, but there is interstate as well. I know in the data set. So what the goal here is going to do is we're going to see which one creates more conflict. So that is the question. So the conflict type is the independent variable, and the death estimate is the dependent variable. That's how you would say. So if you were doing large N data science with foreign policy, national security, etc., that would be the question. So what we're going to do here, it depends on the class you're in, but you don't have to necessarily do this, but this is just what we do. We'll call it something like, I don't know, what do you people like? I don't know, we'll call it a lot of students vape, I'm sure. So we'll call it vape. We can call it anything you want. This is using R Studio. R is the statistical environment. R Studio is the user-friendly interface that makes it a little better looking. And then LM, that's a function called linear modeling. So we're going to see. So the independent variable comes first, which is the death estimate. All you got to do is type it up here and you see it's the death estimate. And then Tia tilde is regressing on the conflict type. So we want to know what the conflict type is. Here it is. And what's the name of our data? Data equals, what's the name? Conflict national security. So right there, you figure, oops, where is it? Up here, because that's the data set. So this is a pretty big data set. There we go. I ran it. It's called VAPE. LM is the linear model. Death estimate conflict, right? Type is, yep, death estimate is here, the dependent variable, the result. And the conflict type here is the type of conflict. So, and the data is national security. Very interesting. So we want a summary of the data because this is a large N data set. It is not case studies. You have all these data points and you come up and you say vape. See, here it is having a party with the vape. And there are your results. And I can hit this button. We won't be able to see this. And there you go. It's very interesting. So this is interstate, internationalized against internal, which is the base here. Since these are three nominal variables, you won't have to know all this. And they're basically comparing to internalized. The reason why internalized is the first one, the base, is because that word is first in the alphabet. That's what R does. So when you look at it, our results are pretty significant, meaning the type of conflict matters. The T value is very high, 5, 5. The standard of error, which is essentially our precision of the data set in the sense that we can't pick every single solitary conflict. So it's kind of a sample of out there, and that's representative of our sample. But this is very important. This is our practical value, which shows with every unit increase of essentially the internationalized or interstate, you're getting an increase. So if you look at internationalized, it's very high. And this is very high, and they're positive, so that means that it's going up. And then you've got these here. So what you have here is, and you can see right here that that huge number, that interstate seems to be the highest, right? Look at that standard, I'm sorry, the T value, etc. So we really don't need to know everything here because this is just kind of introducing you to it. But this is exactly what you would do in large and data. A lot of people say they don't like it, right? They don't like statistics, but it's very interesting just to see how, oh, wow, interstate seems to be very, very significant, higher. Look at that. That's the estimate. So that's saying basically compared to internal, you're getting what? 4,346 on average deaths more than the internal. And then you've got internationalized, you're getting 1,432 deaths average with every increase. Um, so you've got this is pretty intense, showing that these two are significantly higher death rates than on average than internal. So, but how can we see all of them compared? Well, that's where we use this a means function. And you've got a means, and what do we call it? Vape? Vape, we're going to do vape. You don't have to necessarily know how to run this depending on your class, but that's pairwise. So we're going to see all of them compared. The independent variables conflict type. Let's take a look. And this is all of them compared. So you see they're all statistically significant, meaning because the p-value is less than 0.05. They're all statistically significant, meaning that the conflict type matters. It matters. So this is very important to understand in international relations, national security. Let's say U.S. foreign policy. Do we get involved in this crisis? Well, you have to understand that this crisis leads to a whole lot more deaths. So you take, for example, this internal versus internationalized, that's significantly lower internal because it goes by the first one here, and that's a negative. So that means there's less. And it's statistically significant, which means internationalized is more. Internal here, right? Again, being compared now to interstate is also negative, which means that there's more interstate deaths relative to internal. And then you've got internationalized and interstate, which means interstate is more because this is negative and that goes with internationalized. So what does that mean, all this? Statistically significant p-value under 0.05, very high ratios. They're all negative here, which means the first one is lower deaths, is basically saying that in conflict, you have three types here. Internal, which is just the government versus a non-state actor. Internationalized, which is government versus a non-state actor, rebel group, etc. That's being supported significantly from an outside power. And interstate, which is like two-state powers like the Ukraine and Russia. So it's basically saying internal versus internationalized, this has more deaths because internal is negative and it's statistically significant. Interstate and internal is statistically significant because interstate obviously has more than internal because that's negative. And then internationalized versus interstate because that's negative reflecting this. That means interstate, two states like the Ukraine and Russia and other states have significantly more deaths. So you have to understand that. So if you want to get into the Ukraine-Russian war, correct, you need to understand that that's going to produce a whole lot more deaths on average than these other types of conflict. I know it's kind of difficult, but the goal here is to kind of understand for what a big data is. This is what big data is. Conflict type. You've got three, you got one independent variable, conflict type, then three attributes of it: internal, internationalized, and interstate. And then you have the death estimate, which is the dependent variable, the result. And after running it, statistically speaking, this is not a statistics class necessarily, depending on which one you watch it, is that you see a statistical significance between the death estimate and the conflict type. So conflict type matters. And I was able to change my mouse to show how smart I am to blue. Look at that. Pretty nice, huh? Well, thanks everyone for coming out and listening to me.